Episode 42 is a follow up of episode 41. So I kindly request you to first listen to episode 41 to connect with our discussion in episode 42. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Yeah, these are very important points that you mentioned. And, just came to my thought. I know this is not a topic of discussion, but as a space and defense expert, I can actually see the way Russia Ukraine conflict was portrayed in the international domain and the way Israel and Palestine conflict is portrayed at the moment. Whereas I see the actions of Russia in Ukraine were aggressive, of course, but they were not, like simultaneous. Like people are still, living in Ukraine, like especially in the capital city. The business are still on. Everything is still on. I mean, I recorded several podcasts with some of my former colleagues and friends from the industry who are currently residing in Kiev when the attack was actually going on at that time. But things were not as much as aggressive as what we see right now in this conflict. But we see the shift in the narrative. You know, I think this is where the disinformation comes into the play, and that's exactly the reason I mentioned that. This especially happens when there are people who post things just based on their personal opinion and don't really have a ground reality aspect or the elements in their analysis. So we, each of us, I think individually, it's not only the governments. We cannot always blame government, of course. There are some faults in the governments, in our respective governments as well. But a lot of power is in our hands as well, as the people, as an individual, as someone who is even serving in the industry too. That unless and until we know the right facts, we shouldn't, post or possibly scream or shout even on the social media about those things. So, from that perspective, Apurva, I just had a question because this question relates a lot to the narrative. What role does international media coverage play in shaping the public perception of the conflict, and how it might it impact the international responses?
I mean, in my perspective, it's not just in my perspective, I guess everyone would agree with it.
Yes.
International media coverage plays a very critical role in contributing to any discourse.
Yes.
And it is not limited to mainstream media anymore, but it also includes the social media. You have Twitter, which is now X, you have Instagram, you have Facebook, you have TikTok, you have other channels as well that are having this Telegram and Discord and various other, where everyone is discussing about the recent developments taking place across the world. So in this case as well, in the recent Israel Hamas war, there is an unprecedented, unconventional warfare that is taking place, where both these sides are trying to put forth their side of the story to play as to who is the victim and who is the aggressor. And this is the power of media, that it has the power to portray a victim as an aggressor and vice versa. I mean, let's just take a few instances which has taken place since October 7th in this regards. You initially had a reports about the 40 babies being beheaded in Kafar Aza, which eventually spread like a wildfire. The report was on October 11th. The next day, Israeli officials are saying that the government has not confirmed the claims of the beheadings.
Okay.
On further investigation in this report, it is there were news that some journalist from particular media house had said that Israeli soldiers had told her that they had found their babies with their heads cut off. And that, not only that, the video was viewed for millions of times on X. And later on, that same journalist is saying that the soldier told her that they believed that the babies, 40 babies were beheaded like that. So somehow 40 babies were killed. So somehow these two pieces of information was connected, and the story became 40 babies were beheaded. The most
Okay.
high profile claim in that particular report was of President Joe Biden, who said that he has seen the evidence of those information. Later on, there was pressure on White House when they eventually retracted and clarified that Biden was only referring to the news reports, and which does not include a refer to the photographic evidence. You have this case. Then you have another case of the Al Ahel hospital that was recently under attack. Both these sides were so fast in blaming each other. Now, Israel was blaming Palestinian organizations, Palestinian militant factions. Then you had Palestinian militant factions, I guess it was Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, that came out and said, we do make errors, but this is not the mistake that we have done. And both of them, both the sides were putting the blame on each other without waiting for any investigations or understanding as to whether it was the I mean, obviously, the news has now been clarified as to what exactly happened, that it was a parking lot and everything. But that news also spread like wildfire, and everyone was quick on blaming one side or the other. Then you have other information as well, the videos that are coming through, where you have one there is this one woman who is holding her child, and there are these Hamas fighters, I think it was Hamas fighters, were saying, we won't harm you, we won't harm you. And then there was another Jewish woman who was interviewed. She said that Hamas there were people from the Hamas group that had come into her house, and she thought that they're going to kill her. And they said that, no, don't be afraid, we're not going to kill you. They had a banana and left. And finally, there are also interviews that are coming about the Israeli hostages that have been released by Hamas. So when you look at all these videos in parallel to each other, there is a notable shift towards the Palestinian narrative, highlighting the Palestinian stories, the Palestinian plight, how Israeli defense forces, the ground offensive has inflicted such increased casualties. No,
Yes.
I mean, use of information warfare has taken place in the past as well. There's no denying, because there have been ground offensive in the past as well, between Israel and Gaza. But the general trend during those conflicts was that the moment there is an increase in civilian casualties, there is a decrease in Israeli support. There is a decrease in support amongst the policymakers and the international community for Israel's situation. So these factors play a huge role in terms of, be it misinformation or disinformation. And the increasing role when it comes to social media is that both the sides say that the social medias are supporting one side, the other side is saying that it's the Israeli stories are being put forward in the social media than the other side, and vice versa. This has also been going on. However, one needs to understand that in social media there are algorithms and there are moderation, but eventually these algorithms cannot suppress the photos and videos when there is an increased volume of posts and thousands of people are engaging with it. Now, look at the situation right now. I mean, if you go on any social media, you have hashtag Free Palestine, hashtag I stand with Palestine, hashtag I stand with Israel, and everything. So the social media is a very important tool. And why? Because unlike the previous generation, which relied on newspapers, which relied on TV channels, this generation, which is the Gen Z and the millennials, are more reliant on social media for their news. They rely on social media for getting all the information across the world. So for someone who is unfamiliar with the complexities of the Israel-Palestine conflict, about any politics that is taking place, they would try to understand this based on the information that is on social media. And they are being influenced based on the images and the videos and the photographs, rather than just one person saying about it. So this completely shifts the narrative, shapes the narrative of any conflict. Now,
Yes.
you won't say that this has no impact. I mean, a lot of people say that, so what if someone is liking it? So what if someone is sharing it? So what someone is commenting on it? So what if there's some hashtag or someone is viewing about it? People don't realize it that once you have viewed these things, it shapes the perception amongst the public. When a large audience is looking at it, it shapes the perception of a larger population of the general population across the world, not just one place, across the world. And it has a huge impact because it critically leads to a situation where the general population's opinion also impacts the entire conversations and the responses that are taking place at the policy level. Now, let's take the case of the United States. Again, I'm going to refer to US because, again, it's a primary ally for Israel.
Yes.
There has been a gradual shift. Look at the conversations that are taking place in the universities of the United States of America. I mean, you can't use that as a parameter for the entire population. I completely get it, but it's the younger population that is much more supportive of the Palestinian narrative rather than for Israel, rather than for the Israeli narrative. Until two
Yes.
weeks ago, White House spokesperson was saying that ceasefire right now would only benefit Hamas, and we are not going to draw any red lines for Israel. That was the situation. That was the statements that were coming out from the White House. But that has drastically changed. Why? Because in the United States of America, next year they are going to have an election, and President Biden is seeking for a re-election. And this particular conflict, this particular war is a huge challenge for President Biden and his election campaign. Because Democrats, for the Democrats, the Muslim and the Arab American vote is very critical. Muslim and the Arab American voters have traditionally been a strong base for the Democrats. And the Israeli-Gaza conflict, Israel-Hamas war has eroded this support. This is prevalent in various swing states, like Michigan, you have Ohio, you have Pennsylvania, where even a small population holds a substantial sway. In 2020, Biden enjoyed a huge support from the Arab and Muslim Americans. But the recent polls, as per the Arab American Institute, shows that there is a steep decline amongst these voters for President Biden because of the way the government is handling the war. For them, they are straight up upfront about it. No ceasefire in Gaza, no vote for you. And this plays a huge role when even a small margin can turn the tide.
Yes.
I saw this report. I read about this report for the first time about the end of October. I mean, October, let's say October 31st. On November 1st, President and the Vice President Kamala Harris is announcing about the United States' first ever national strategy to counter Islamophobia. These developments do not take place in vacuum. These developments do not take place randomly. There are no coincidences in political developments. This much I have understood based on my experience. It's just various dots that needs to be connected. The result was out 2 or 3 days before, and the announcement is being made. Simple. Why? Because the support is being eroded and they need their support, and it is very important in swing states, not just one, but several swing states. One of them is Michigan. So social media is now driving the entire public opinion. On November 6th now, not just this, on November 6th, President Biden is then now calling Prime Minister Netanyahu and saying it is critical for a humanitarian pause. And from October 7th to up until this situation, until this statement, there was no such developments that was taking place. Developments that were not taking place for 2 weeks before have suddenly taking place now because of the public opinion, because of the public perception. How public opinion influences the policymakers? Because they form the voter base. Not just that, apart from this, there is another video that I was looking on the internet about Republican candidate Ron DeSantis in the United States. He was interacting with a lot of people about this war, and someone in that video, I mean, his his or her face is not shown. His face was not shown on the video, but he was saying, I have seen those pictures. I'm not listening to you. This is
Okay.
where social media plays a critical role, because on one side you have statements coming up from policymakers, but on the other hand there are people with smartphones showing with their photos and videos that, see, this is what we are going through, see, this is what is our situation, this is what we are dealing
Yes.
with, support us, sympathize with us, stand by us. And it's not just the US, it's not just the US, it's UK as well. Labour Party, for the Labour Party, the Muslim votes are very important. And Keir Starmer has been criticized a lot for not calling for a ceasefire because of his stance in this particular war. And this backlash has intensified to such an extent that more than 50 councillors have resigned. And even though it is a fraction, but it is a huge development. Until a couple of days ago, prominent politicians were not making a statement. But eventually, even Mayor Sadiq Khan made a statement calling out for a ceasefire about this. BBC,
Yes.
CNN, they are apologizing for the kind of information that they are reporting. BBC apologized for saying that pro-Palestinian demonstrations were backing Hamas. This statement was made by a reporter. They eventually apologized. Not just BBC, CNN has also had to apologize for defending Israeli claims that Hamas beheaded babies. At least in my, I have not seen, for me, this is the first time that an international media house, not just one, two or three, several, at least in my knowledge, BBC and CNN have apologized. I have never seen this before. And this is based on the public perception. This is based on the public outrage that is evident on social media. And
Yes.
the reason why I am highlighting these things is one needs to understand that, again, I'm going to repeat this point. I've repeated this in the previous question when you asked me. Information warfare is playing a huge role. Social media is playing a huge role. You cannot just battle on the ground and just leave the narrative to whatever interpretation that is taking place. It is important that this information warfare is also leveraged so that
Yes.
they are able to put forth their opinion, their side of the story. Because there's no point if you are just sitting you are winning the war on ground, you're losing the war on ground, but you do not have you are losing it out completely on the digital space. And I think social media, this is something that it's open to interpretation, but social media has also given space for the Palestinian narrative. Why I'm saying that is because in the past,
Yes.
let's not just right now, let's take it 10 years back, 20 years back. There were a lot of Jewish policy makers across the world. There were a lot of Jewish speakers who were coming onto the mainstream media, giving interviews and everything. But in the recent times, it's not just, the local general population is using the social media to leverage their side of the story, their narrative. But even there are a lot of Palestinians, a lot of speakers who are coming onto mainstream media, coming onto interviews and doing interviews on mainstream media to put forth their side of the story. In the most recent that I have known about these kind of programs is about the Piers Morgan interview. I haven't watched those videos, but there are so many people that are coming through. You have Mohammed Hijab, you have Basim Yusuf, then there was a recent, then you, on the other hand, you also had Ben Shapiro. And the most recent one in terms of this kind of a debate was it was a panel discussion between Rabbi Shmulek and Senk Uyghur. I may be wrong with the pronunciation, but that was the conversations that are taking place. So Israeli government is also aware of it. I'm not saying that they are completely unaware or completely they are overlooking it, because they are using various social medias, they are funding a lot to put forth their side of the story. But at the end of the day, I mean, the information warfare, everything that is taking place, that's one side of the story. But I mean, if you ask me how this has benefited, I'll say more than, I mean, it has, I mean, obviously both sides of the stories are coming out, both of them, there are various narratives that are taking place, but this has also increased the hatred amongst the people.
Yes.
There has been, if you look at any social media account, there is no constructive debate that is going on. There is no constructive discussion that is taking place. If you look
Yes.
at one photo, one video, you click on it, you click on any account, it's either pro-Palestinian or it's pro-Israeli. And
Yes.
both of them ask you, if you ask the pro-Israeli group or the pro-Palestinian group, the social media accounts, both of them will blame each other, and both of them will say that we are the ones who are suffering. On the other hand, they'll say we are the one who are suffering. This has increased the hatred amongst the general population. There has an increasing Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that across the world, not just one particular country, because social media is accessible across the world. So these kind of hatred, these kind of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is taking place across the world. It has increased
Yes.
because of, I mean, on light of the situation that is taking place. There are so many videos that are coming out. Someone is attacking them for their perspective, someone is attacking them for their perspective. One thing that I've
Yes.
realized is, on social media or anywhere, you cannot have a debate. If you say that this is a situation, they will eventually call you out. They'll say, oh, you are anti-Semite, you are anti-Semitic, you are against the then you will have some other who would be saying, you do not you are pro-Israeli person, you do not stand for the plight of Palestinians. The space for having a constructive debate to understand the broader picture is being reduced by the day, and the misinformation and disinformation is doing much more harm than good.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with this perspective. And just to kind of step a little bit ahead, I mean, you can briefly answer this question because Iran is, of course, not a focus topic, but you can definitely touch up on this thing. So, what are the geopolitical implications of this conflict and how it might influence the Middle Eastern in a broader sense?
Since the October 7 attack, I mean, October 7, the attack took place. On October 8, Wall Street Journal brings out a report that states that it was Iran that gave a green light to Hamas to attack Israel. And they were the ones who helped Hamas. And it was Iran who assisted Hamas in planning an operation. Now, this has been categorically denied by Israel. It has been categorically denied by Iran and the United States of America. But in this situation, there are two scenarios that comes into mind. One, either they are downplaying the entire role of Iran in public to ensure that this situation does not escalate into a regional conflict, or the fact that Iran is a well-known supporter of Hamas. This is a well-known fact. In terms of financing and military training and logistics support, Iran has been doing that, because Iran has been using these kind of proxies to increase its influence in the region, because it wants to be involved in the entire regional geopolitics and everything. But the primary concern since the onset of this ground offensive, since the onset of the attack, was what would Hezbollah do? Whether there would be a second front, whether Israel would be put in a situation where it would have a two-front war. Now, why particularly Hezbollah is because Hezbollah is also, as in, is an Iranian proxy and is also a part of the resistance axis. Since the
Yes.
beginning of the conflict, Hezbollah has been executing very tactical attacks on Israel, but it was restrained in its attack. It was restrained to show solidarity with Hamas, but at the same time to prevent the escalation with Israel. This shows a kind of strategy, a calculated approach from Hezbollah. And this, I mean, Hamas was disappointed with it. Even, in fact, Khaled Mashal, who was a very prominent figure of Hamas, said that this is not how history is written, meaning that he was not happy with the kind of support that Hezbollah is providing to Hamas because they were expecting much more. Now, the kind of situation was, I mean, this concern for there was this conversation for whether it would be a full-fledged war or would it be a limited war. That was the analysis for the first few days after the initial attack by Hamas. But eventually, the major development with regards to what Hezbollah would do was based on the speech of Hassan Nasrallah on November 3rd. This was the first time he spoke about the Israel war since the attack took place on October 7th. It was a very elaborate and comprehensive speech that was given about 1.5 hours. Hassan Nasrallah had spoken about it. But on a deeper analysis, it shows that Nasrallah used this speech to put forth a lot of information which gave a sense of clarity to not just Israel, not just Israeli defense forces or the politicians, but also across the world, because that was a major concern across the world, again, about the second front.
Yes.
In the speech, he distanced Hezbollah, not just Hezbollah, I think it was also Iran. And I was listening to that speech. They also, he distanced Hezbollah and Iran that by saying that the entire Al-Aqsa floods operation was initiated by the Palestinian faction, that they were completely independent of their decision making, and this was completely kept as a secret from other groups in the resistance axis. The second thing he also mentioned was to address the growing criticism against Hezbollah for not supporting Hamas. Nasrallah went on to say that the group has been engaged in a battle since October 8 with operations launched from Lebanon, and it has and they have also lost several fighters to show that they have also been inflicted with several casualties. He also further went ahead and hinted about Israel's weakness and fragility and how the kind of massive intelligence failure that has taken place and the kind of lack of Israeli defense forces preparation to deal with such an attack, because literally and figuratively a lot of commanders were caught in their pajamas. So, but at the same time, he used the speech and hinted that about Hezbollah's readiness for further escalation. And it was evident because Hezbollah had changed its military tactics when it fired surface-to-surface air missiles for the first time in around the end of October. And it underscored how the group is dealing with the developing situation to counter Israeli drones that are identifying Hezbollah fighters that are trying to approach the Israeli borders. But finally, he gave one statement. The escalation from Hezbollah depends on two things: the course of events that takes place in Gaza and their development, and second, Israel's activities in Lebanon. So this way, he said, the possibility of a Lebanese front is a possibility, and all the options are open. In my opinion, the entire speech was very well articulated, but it also outlined the strategy that Israel needs to be very calculative when it's making any decisions or taking any actions against Lebanon. Moreover, when he says that the entire situation, how it unfolds in Gaza, when he said that he also, further escalation would be based on the situation that are taking place in Gaza. In my opinion, that is already started taking place, because there have been several deeper incursion on Israeli territories and in the Lebanese territories. And now, why I'm saying that, there were exchange of fires previously as well between both the sides, and both the sides have had losses. But the firing, the attacks that are taking place is now more and more deeper into each other's territory, which is kind of creating an unstable situation. This
Yes.
took place on November 3rd, and within 1 week, within 1.5 weeks, the situation has changed a lot, because there have been an increased risk of rocket launches and clashes in the past couple of days after the speech. And it's not just Hezbollah, but several other groups that are involved in this conflict, because it was, I think, a couple of days ago, it was Islamic group that stated that it was them who had launched attacks, launched rockets on Israel on October 18th. Not only that, even US State Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has expressed his concern to his Israeli counterpart, saying that there is a growing concern in the White House on the actions that are taking place in Israel-Lebanon border that could lead to a regional conflict. So all the calculative moves need to be taken place on in the Israeli side as well, because we have now reached a situation that rules of engagement may not hold much longer, and any miscalculation, any misstep, any misanalysis could lead to a further escalation that no one wants. So it's, I mean, to conclude whether I mean, this situation is going to escalate or not, it's not as of now the concern for a full-fledged war that was there since the onset of the war on October 7th, that was reduced. But apart from that, one question that eventually boils down to is, to what extent Hezbollah is ready to pay a price in case if they get into a full-fledged war, and what will be their interpretation for Hamas's loss, because it's not based on my perspective or your perspective that Hamas is losing or winning. It's Hezbollah's
Yes.
perspective, which is different. If Hezbollah thinks that, okay, Hamas is losing, and they have said that depends on the situation in Gaza and on the Lebanese border. So that analysis, again, if there is any miscalculation at that in that point, it can lead to an increased escalation. But it's not just Lebanon, it's not just Hezbollah, it's not just Lebanon-based groups, militant groups that are of concern right now, because the Iranian proxies have been spread across the region, be it Syria, be it Iraq, be it Yemen, and there has been an increased frequency and intensity of attacks that are taking place, especially on the US bases, US strategic interest in the region, because of the support that they are providing to Israel, despite the humanitarian crisis that is taking place. This is a major concern. And look at the kind of attacks that are taking place now. There are about 52 strikes. As per Pentagon, there are about 52 strikes that have taken place since October 17th, which has resulted in several casualties, not death, casualties, injuries. But there is another institute, which is the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which states that there have been 66 attacks by Iranian proxies on US bases. So there have been a surge in attacks on the US bases across the region. And there have been a lot of missiles that have been launched on Israel, be it the Iran-backed Houthis launching ballistic missiles at Israel, but it was eventually intercepted and by the US. But so this kind of a situation is taking place across the region, and in case this frequency of attacks eventually increases on the US basis, it is obviously known that US would respond, thereby escalating the risk of retaliation and spiraling this into a much more wider regional confrontation.
Yes. Yep. I think you have covered in an extensive manner about this thing from the angle of Iran. But I would also like to mention that, Iran is actually well known to kind of utilize whatever hot plate of geopolitics is there in the third country to utilize it to their benefit. For example, I would like to give it from the space industry's perspective. During the US exit from Afghanistan, most of the US bases in Iraq were busy supporting the units in Afghanistan. So Iran actually took that opportunity and procured commercial satellite imagery from a commercial satellite company. Now, till today, no one knows which was that company or from which part of the world it was. And they used those satellite imageries to target the US bases in Iraq. Several officers actually lost their lives, and several other soldiers as well lost their lives on the US base in Iraq. But yeah, this is how it has been. Iran has been actually well known to, kind of do this kind of thing. That's one of the reason I have been very much skeptical, because I had one guest from Israel as well, Israel Security Agency, and he clearly mentioned that we don't think so that there is an infiltration on the intelligence level by Iran, but on the defense side, or the military equipments, weapons, ammunitions, on this side definitely there are some movements. But of course, there has been no hard evidence on it. So yeah, just wanted to actually add one point, Apurva, on what you said. And as we are reaching now the end of podcast, I would like to actually ask you, like, just to kind of zoom out from the conversation and to ask this question for the students, because there is a lot of student and researchers, even the PhD researchers, postdocs, people as well, who listen to this podcast. So this question is basically for them. So, for what message would you like to share with student researchers and other stakeholders participating and engaging in peace and conflict research studies?
It is very important to look at not just one perspective or other perspective, but it is very important for anyone, any researcher, to have a look at a broader picture, look at the broader context of any conflict that is taking place across the world. Also, we all are humans, even the researchers are human. It is very challenging for us to keep our bias aside when we are reporting. But it is also very essential, it is also very important that we make sure that our own biases do not impact the kind of research that we are doing.
Yes.
The entire understanding when it comes to what is the role of a researcher, in my mind, is study one side, study the other side, mention both, and leave it for the readers. So this is
Exactly.
very important, and let's hope that everyone is able to do that.
Yes. Thank you very much, Apurva, for providing such valuable insights into the topic. And I hope the audience as well enjoys this. And I really hope, Apurva, to record some more episodes with you in the future on some other topics as well. So, yeah, thank you very much again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity.